After 2 years of seasonal work and a car she'd been sleeping in since she aged out of the Harwick County foster system, Nora Vance had $17, a library card from a county she no longer lived in, and one answer to the question of where she was from: Harwick, Missouri, where her mother had grown up and her great-uncle Decker had run a community radio station for 37 years. Before the Piney Creek flood took the transmitter building, and the county took the rest. When the tax office listed the flooded tower site on Route 9 for $5, the estate executor hadn't contested it. The media broker circling the property walked away when he saw the water line on the cinder block wall, and every other bidder put their paddle down. Nora raised hers. But 4 weeks later, when she cut the padlock off the sealed broadcast room and found what Decker had locked inside before the water came, she understood that the flood had never been the story. It had only been the door. The foster care system in Harwick County operated on a principle of documentation. Everything was written down and filed and referenced later, which gave the appearance of care without always delivering its substance. Nora Vance had been documented since she was 7, when her mother, June Vance, died of a drug interaction in the parking lot of a Walgreens in Rolla, and Nora had been found in the car by a pharmacy technician who noticed the engine running. She remembered the parking lot. She remembered the color of the pharmacy's sign and the smell of the upholstery, and the way the engine's sound was so steady and ordinary that it took her a long time to understand that something was wrong. She did not remember most of the next 6 months. What she remembered clearly began at her first placement, a house in Ava with 2 other children and a woman named Bev, who was kind in the way that people were kind when they were tired. Genuinely, but at a distance. She'd had 4 placements in 11 years. She'd been in Harwick County for the last 2, at a group home near the reservoir, and when she turned 18 in November. She'd been handed a plastic bag with her things, a resource list, and a handshake from a man named Felix who ran the intake office and who said, without apparent irony, that she was going to do great. She had not done great immediately. The 2 years between 18 and 20 were the kind of 2 years that didn't have a clean story. She picked produce in the summer in 2 different states and found enough day work in the winters to keep gas in the car and food that came from convenience stores and occasionally from churches, which she accepted without comment because she had learned that the particular pride that refused help was a pride she couldn't afford. She moved because work moved. She slept in the car because apartments required deposits, and deposits required money she was always about to have and hadn't gotten to yet. She knew almost nothing about her family. Her mother had mentioned, in the occasional clear interval that Nora was old enough to remember, a great-uncle named Decker who ran a radio station in the Ozarks. She'd said his voice was the kind of voice that belonged on the radio, warm and unhurried, with the particular quality of a man who found the world genuinely interesting and wanted to talk about it. She'd said he played music nobody else played and interviewed people nobody else thought to interview, and that the station was the only place in Harwick County you could get the farm report and a bluegrass set and a book recommendation all in the same hour. She'd said she missed it. Nora had never heard it. She'd been 7 when June died, and radio stations were not among the things 7-year-olds cataloged for later. She found out about Decker's death from a legal notice. She was in a library in Poplar Bluff, using the internet to look for work, when she typed her name into a county records search on a restless instinct. The kind of searching you did when you were 20 and had no information about where you came from and wondered, periodically and without much hope, if somewhere in a county record system there was a thread. The legal notice was from Harwick County Probate. It mentioned her by name as a potential heir who had not been located despite standard notification attempts. It mentioned an estate being administered by a county-appointed executor. It mentioned a property. She read the address of the property 3 times. Route 9. Harwick County. A radio tower site on 11 acres. She called the probate number from the library's public phone. The executor, a man named Prentice who worked in the county assessor's office on a part-time basis and had the clipped manner of someone who managed small estates as a side function, told her the property had been condemned following flood damage and was currently in a tax lien process. He described the property without sentiment. A cinder block transmitter building, partially flooded and structurally suspect, a 200-foot tower, a small broadcast studio accessed by an exterior staircase at the tower base. He said he had attempted to locate next of kin and had been unable to find Nora Vance in any current records. "I'm Nora Vance," she said. A pause. Well, Prentice said, there's a tax lien auction in 14 days. What's the opening bid? $5. It's a condemned site. The county wants the liens cleared and the property transferred. She had 120 miles to drive and $17. She drove it. She arrived in Harwick 2 days before the auction and slept in the car on a county road and spent $3 on coffee at a gas station that had a handwritten note in the window that said the owner had gone to his sister's in Camdenton and would be back Tuesday, which gave it a specific human quality that she found briefly comforting. She spent the day before the auction walking the Route 9 property from the road, not going in because the fence was padlocked and she didn't own it yet, and she had learned in 2 years of moving through other people's spaces that property lines mattered, and she intended to respect them. The tower was visible from the road. 200 feet of galvanized steel lattice rising from a crest in the Ozark Hills, the transmission antenna at the top still intact, the guy wires running to concrete anchors in the ground. The cinder block building at the base had a visible water line on the south wall. The creek had come up at least 3 feet at peak and then receded, leaving a dark stain on the concrete block like a tide mark on a cliff. One of the windows on the south side was broken. The door was padlocked. The exterior staircase to the broadcast studio was on the east side, bolted to the tower structure itself, running up about 20 feet to a small room cantilevered from the tower legs. The studio door, at the top of the stairs, was also padlocked. Across the face of the door, in large letters written in permanent marker on a sheet of cardboard taped to the steel, someone had written, "Sealed, for Nora." She stood at the fence for a long time, looking at those 2 words. Her great-uncle Decker had sealed a room in a radio tower with her name on it, on a property in a county where she hadn't lived since she was 7, in a family she had never properly known. He had done it before the flood came, and before he died, and before the county attached a lien and put it up for $5 at a tax auction. He had known she would come. Or he had hoped. He had left a door with her name on it, and that was a form of hope she hadn't encountered before, specific and patient and pointed directly at her. The auction was at 10 the next morning. When the auctioneer called the Route 9 property, one other paddle went up. A man in the back in khaki who looked like he'd been waiting for something and had reconsidered when he saw the water damage photos in the docket. He put his paddle down when Nora bid $5. She was the only bidder. She paid at the window in 1s and a $5 she'd gotten from the ATM with the last of her account balance. The clerk stamped the deed and slid it across the counter without ceremony. Nora Vance folded the deed into the inside pocket of her jacket and walked out of the county building into the Ozark morning. The property key was a ring with 3 keys, front gate padlock, transmitter building, and a third that she assumed was the broadcast studio upstairs. Prentice had handed them to her with the paperwork without discussion, the way an executor handed over keys when the property they represented was more burden than asset. She unlocked the gate on a Thursday afternoon in late April, when the Ozark Hills were fully leaved and the creek below the property was running clear and modest. Nothing like what it must have been at peak. She walked the fence line before going to the building, the way her grandfather, she'd heard the word used once, by Bev, referring to someone on her mother's side, might have walked a field, getting a sense of the thing before engaging with it. The 11 acres were mostly upland hardwood with a cleared area around the tower and transmitter building. The creek formed the south boundary. The guy wire anchors were positioned at the cardinal points from the tower base, and the grass around them was overgrown but not damaged. The tower itself, up close, was in better condition than it looked from the road. Galvanized steel didn't rust the way iron did, and the welds at each junction were still tight. The transmitter building had taken the damage. The south wall showed the water line clearly, 3 feet and 4 inches from ground level. She measured it with her forearm and marked it against her sleeve. The door swung open with some resistance, the bottom edge scraping against flood-deposited silt. Inside, the air smelled like creek water and mildew, and the particular electrical smell of equipment that had been wet and dried out and might or might not work. The room was about 20 feet square. Equipment racks lined the north wall, the transmitter itself, taller than she was, in a gray metal housing with dials and meters on the face. The meters were dark. On the workbench along the east wall, tools were arranged on pegs above a pegboard, the kind of careful organization that said something about the person who'd used them. A socket set, soldering equipment, a multimeter, cable management tools, everything dusty, Everything water-marked at the lower levels, but the tools on the pegs above the waterline were undamaged. On the corner of the workbench, above the flood mark, were three things: a pair of headphones, large, over-ear, the kind used in broadcast booths. The left ear pad was worn smooth at the center, the foam underneath pressing through, the evidence of decades of the same head wearing the same headphones in the same position. The right pad was intact, slightly newer looking, replaced at some point and not yet worn to match. A station log card, the kind used for official broadcast documentation. It was cream-colored cardstock with clip printed at the top and below it, in Decker's handwriting, a date and a note, 37 years and still the best job in the county. A coffee mug with a radio tower printed on the side. Inside, the instant coffee had crystallized, dried down to a brown film and then to a crust that preserved the shape of the meniscus where it had last been liquid. Decker Hale had made a cup of instant coffee, drunk most of it, and set the rest on the workbench on the day or the week before everything changed, and it had stayed there in the stillness of a sealed building for 8 months, holding the shape of a morning he'd never come back to finish. Nora picked up the headphones, held them by the headband and looked at the worn pad. She set them back on the bench. She picked up the log card, read what he'd written. Set it back beside the mug. She did not touch the mug. She wasn't sure why, but it felt like the most personal of the three. More personal than the headphones or the card, and she wasn't ready for personal yet. She went to the exterior staircase on the east side of the tower. The stairs were steel grating bolted to the tower legs, with a pipe railing on the open side. She tested each step. They held. 20 feet up, a small platform with a non-slip surface led to the broadcast studio door, steel-framed, weather-tight, with the padlock she'd seen from the road and the cardboard sign. Sealed, for Nora. The third key from the ring was in her hand. She stood on the platform with the Ozark Hills in every direction, the new green of the hardwoods running south and west and east to where the hills folded into each other, and below, the creek and the tower running up above her. And the whole county quiet in the way that rural Missouri was quiet in the afternoon. She was 20 years old. She had $17 when she'd arrived in Harwick County, and she'd spent 14 of them on gas and coffee. She had a deed to a flooded radio tower, $3, and a door with her name on it. She put the key in the padlock. The shackle opened. She pushed the door inward. Inside was a broadcast booth about 10 feet by 12, elevated above the flood line and untouched by water. A console ran along the front wall, mixing board, 2 turntables, a CD player, a reel-to-reel tape machine on a shelf above. Acoustic foam tiles on every wall, some peeling at the corners but most intact, doing the job they'd done for 3 decades. A microphone on a swing arm over the console tilted toward where a person would sit. A window of safety glass facing west showing the hillside. And on the console, set deliberately at the center, a sealed padded envelope with her name written on it in the same handwriting as the log card. Nora. She did not open it yet. She sat down in the broadcast chair, padded, rolling, adjusted to a height that said Decker Hale had been about 5 feet 10, and she looked at the console and the microphone and the window and the hills. She did not know what she was going to do next. She knew that the chair fit her, which was something. She knew that the studio smelled like the particular combination of heated electronics and acoustic foam that she had never smelled before in her life, and that she was quite sure she was going to miss if she ever left. She put the padded envelope in her jacket pocket. She went back down the stairs and pulled the broadcast door shut and left the padlock open on its hasp. She went back into the transmitter building, sat on an overturned equipment crate, and picked up the log card. 37 YRs and still the best job in the county. She read it until the light changed outside and the building went dim, and then she sat in the near dark with the 3 objects on the workbench, and thought about a man she'd never met who had run a radio station in the Ozark Hills for 37 years, and had sealed a room with her name on it before he died. The transmitter room had a floor drain in the center, standard for equipment rooms where spills happened, and when Nora swept the dried flood silt toward it on the second day, her broom handle caught against something that the silt had been concealing. She crouched. The floor was poured concrete with expansion joints running in a grid, standard construction, but in the northwest corner behind the base of the transmitter housing. The seam of one section ran differently from the others, more deliberately. Straight and clean cut, describing a rectangle about 2 feet by 2.5, flush with the surrounding floor but not integral to it. She swept the silt back. Found the edges. Found, at the far corner, 2 recessed steel tabs set into the concrete, lifting points deliberate. Placed there by someone who knew they'd need to come back to this. The transmitter housing was on wheels. She rolled it far enough to clear the rectangle. The lifting tabs took a screwdriver levered under them. The section came up in one piece, hinged at the back edge, the concrete slab pivoting on 2 buried steel pins. Below was a cavity, maybe 18 inches deep, lined in fiberglass insulation and then sealed with plastic sheeting. Inside the sealed plastic, a document box. Metal, with a clasp, heavier than expected. And beside it, a composition book, its cover sealed in a Ziploc bag. She lifted the document box out first. The clasp opened smoothly, oiled recently by someone who had anticipated damp conditions. Inside, a ledger, its cover marked simply Clay Community Log, Decker Hale in black marker. Below the ledger, a bank statement folded in thirds with a rubber band around it. And below that, a sealed envelope from an FCC filing service, its exterior marked license documentation, "Do not discard." She set the FCC envelope aside. She set the bank statement aside. She opened the ledger. The first entry was dated April 14, 1987, helped the Ramsey family get the water heater replaced. Put $200 through the community account and told them it was from the County Assistance Fund. She cried on the phone. I told her the county was glad to help, which it would have been if it had gotten around to it. The second entry, June, Tom's Vela needs a used truck to get to the glass plant in Rolla. Found him one through Carl at the salvage in Ava. $300 from the account. Told him the station had a listener fund for working families. We do, now, because I just named it. Page after page. 37 years of entries, in the same handwriting that had written the log card and the door sign. Each one a record of a need met and a source obscured. Decker Hale had run a community radio station and a community fund simultaneously, and the fund had been his primary instrument for the same purpose the station served, connecting people to what they needed without making the connection feel like charity. He had given money for school supplies, for medical copays, for truck repairs, for heating oil in January, for groceries in the gap between when rent was due and when the paycheck came. He had paid for a woman's emergency dental work by telling her it was a station prize she'd won from a call-in show that he invented on the spot and then made real so she wouldn't feel she'd been given something. He had helped a man get his commercial driver's license by covering the testing fee and the driving school deposit and telling him it was a vocational fund from the state that nobody had claimed. He had told the same truth Corinne Voss had told, that Ruth Kane had told, that Agnes Kroll had told in their different ways. The instrument doesn't matter. What matters is that the thing gets done. Nora read for 2 hours before she opened the composition book from the Ziploc bag. The composition book was a journal, not a ledger, entries undated except by season, the handwriting slightly less formal, more private. She read the early entries quickly, building a sense of the man, his thoughts about the station, about the Ozarks, about the farmers and tradespeople who called in during the afternoon show and the particular democracy of radio, everyone's voice carrying the same distance once they were on air. She turned pages until she found her mother's name. June called the station. Has been listening on and off wherever she can get the signal, says she picked it up once in Rolla and twice from a ridge in Ozark County on a clear night. She entered the call-in contest on Friday. Won it. The prize was $300 from the listener fund, which she said she didn't need as much as someone else and donated back. I argued. She said the money should go to somebody it would mean more to. I put it in a separate account. $3,000 for a future I don't know the shape of yet, added to as the station can manage. I told June I'd spend it on programming. I didn't say on what programming or for whom. Nora set the composition book flat on her knees. Her mother had won a radio contest. She had donated $300 back. Decker had grown it over years into $3,000 and named no one in the account. Because the recipient didn't have a name yet, she was 9 and in a parking lot in Rolla, and the world hadn't arranged itself yet. She looked at the bank statement. The account held $22,500. She didn't look for long. She set it face down and looked at the ceiling and breathed. Then she looked at the FCC envelope. The FCC envelope contained a license renewal confirmation for Clay 91.3 FM. Licensed to the Decker Hale Community Trust, Harwick County, Missouri, the renewal had been filed and confirmed 11 months ago, 2 months before the flood, 4 months before Decker died. The license was valid for 8 years from the renewal date. The station had a valid broadcasting license. Nobody had known because nobody had been looking, and Prentice the executor had assessed the property as a condemned flood site and not investigated the trust documents or the FCC records that weren't in the obvious places. The license had been paid in full and confirmed and filed, and then the flood had come, and Decker had died, and the county had processed the lien, and the station had gone dark, and in all of that, the thing that made the tower worth anything at all, the FM frequency, the license. The right to broadcast on 91.3 across Harwick County, and 2 counties beyond it on a clear night, had been sitting in an FCC database, valid and untouched, waiting for someone to notice. She held the license confirmation in both hands. She read it twice. She folded it carefully along its original crease and put it back in the envelope and held the envelope with the same care you held things that were more important than they appeared. Then she set all of it, the ledger, the composition book, the bank statement, the FCC envelope, on the workbench beside the headphones and the log card and the crystallized coffee mug. 5 objects. The record of a man's life and work and the instrument he'd left running for someone he'd never properly met. She picked up the padded envelope from her jacket pocket. The one from the broadcast room with her name on it. Not yet. She needed to understand more before she opened it. She needed to know the shape of what she'd been given before she looked at it directly. She put it back in her pocket and went to find whoever in Harwick County had known Decker Hale. The nearest property to the tower site was a half-mile east on Route 9. A farmstead with a satellite dish on the barn roof and a garden fence built from salvaged lumber, and a hand-lettered sign by the driveway that said Okafor Sound, by appointment. When Nora pulled up in her car, a man came out of the barn before she'd finished turning off the engine. He was in his mid-60s, compact and quick-moving, with close-cropped gray hair and hands that were simultaneously the hands of a craftsman and a musician. She'd seen both enough to know the difference was minimal. He looked at her car, then at her, with the expression of a man receiving information. "You bought the tower," he said. It wasn't a question. Nora Vance, Decker's great niece. Clem Okafor's face changed. Not dramatically, it was a face accustomed to managing what it showed, but something in it opened. He took his hands out of his pockets. "Come inside," he said. "I've got coffee that's better than whatever Decker kept in that building." He made pour-over in a kitchen that doubled as a mixing studio, a corner desk with a modest digital board, acoustic panels on one wall, cables coiled on hooks with the precision of a man for whom cable management was a form of respect. The coffee was very good. "I was his sound engineer for 19 years, Clem said when they were sitting. "Volunteer. Decker didn't have money for staff. Nobody worked at Clef for pay except Decker, and even he operated on the thinnest margin you can imagine." He held his mug. What he did have was the kind of work that made people want to be useful to it. He kept a ledger, Nora said. "The community fund." Clem looked at his coffee. "I knew about the fund in a general way. Didn't know the specifics." He was careful about that. He paused. "I caught him once loading a box of groceries into Ada Ramsey's car at the food value. He said he'd overbought. He'd never in his life overbought. His composition book mentioned a woman named June," Nora said. "My mother." Clem set his mug down. He looked at her for a long moment. "June called into the Friday show maybe 3 or 4 times that I can remember. She'd get the signal when conditions were right. Decker lit up when she called. You could hear it on air. He'd get a particular quality in his voice when he was talking to someone he genuinely loved." He stopped. "She donated her contest prize back. He kept it for me," Nora said. $3,000, added to. The account has $22,000 in it now." The kitchen was quiet. Through the window, the east face of the radio tower was visible above the tree line, the steel catching the afternoon light. "That man," Clem said, quietly, not to anyone in particular. "That stubborn, careful, private man." He told her about Decker the way Gus Fenwick had talked about Wade, and Agnes about Henry, and Ruth about Corinne. Not in a rush but in the order things deserved, one memory opening onto the next. A portrait built from specific details rather than general praise. Decker Hale had come to Harwick County in 1985 with a broadcast license he'd obtained through a process that was equal parts persistence and creative interpretation of FCC small market rules, and he'd built the tower himself with 2 friends and a structural engineer he'd found through a classified ad. The cinder block building had gone up the following spring. Clay had first broadcast on a Tuesday in June 1986, playing a fiddle tune that Decker had recorded in a barn the previous winter, and the signal had reached 11 miles in every direction and a ridge in Ozark County on a clear night. He was the only broadcaster in 3 counties who played Ozark folk music alongside farm reports and interviewed county commissioners and local teachers, and one time a man who'd found an arrowhead collection in his pasture, Clem said. He understood that the job of local radio was to make the community legible to itself. To say, here is who we are, here is what we grow, here is who needs help, and here is who can give it. The community fund was the same thing, Nora said. It was the same broadcast, Clem said, just not on air. She told him about the FCC license. He went still. The license is valid? Confirmed 11 months ago. Valid for 8 years. Clem was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the mixing board in the corner. He filed it from the hospital, he said finally. He was in Rolla Medical for a week in June last year. Cardiac something. I drove him. He had a folder with him, FCC forms. I thought it was old paperwork. He was filling things out in the hospital bed. He shook his head. I asked him what he was working on. He said loose ends. The generator that powered the remaining station equipment failed on a Thursday. Nora had gotten it running on the 3rd day. An old diesel unit bolted to a concrete pad behind the transmitter building, which Clem helped her check and start with the experience of a man who had started this particular generator 300 times. It was running the transmitter building's lighting and the climate control for the equipment room and, crucially, keeping the backup battery system for the broadcast console charged. The FCC license required a demonstration of operational capability at the next annual inspection, which was in 31 days. Without the generator, the backup batteries would drain in 4 days. Without power, the console wouldn't run. Without the console, she couldn't demonstrate operational capability. And if the demonstration failed, the license entered a review period that would make it significantly more vulnerable to outside challenge. She found out the generator had failed on a Thursday morning when she came down from the studio and the building was dark. She pulled the generator cover and found the voltage regulator had burned out, a component that cost $47 at the electrical supply in Ava and required a truck to get there. She had $11. She sat on the concrete pad next to the dead generator and looked at the problem and understood that it was real and immediate, and that she did not have $47 or a truck or, at this particular moment, a clear idea of what to do next. Clem appeared at the fence gate 20 minutes later with a coffee thermos and a brown paper bag. He looked at the generator, then at her. Voltage regulator, she said. I know. I heard it go from my barn. He opened the gate. I've got one on the shelf. Ordered a spare 2 years ago when the last one started acting up. Never needed it. He set the thermos and the bag on the generator cover. Rosie made biscuits this morning. Eat something. He had the new regulator installed in 45 minutes. The generator started on the second pull. Nora ate the biscuits and drank the coffee and said, I can't keep accepting things I can't pay back. Clem tightened the last bolt and straightened. You're not accepting something you can't pay back. You're accepting something that's already been paid. He put the wrench in his back pocket. Decker fixed my recording equipment 3 times without charging me. He played my daughter's first recording on air when she was 17 and wouldn't have had the confidence to send it anywhere else. He spent 19 years showing up to this station to help me do a job I wasn't paid for because the job mattered. He looked at the generator. This is a $47 regulator and 20 minutes of work. That's not a debt. That's a continuation. By the end of the second week, 7 people had come to the tower site without being asked. A woman named Ada, who had helped Clem with station maintenance for years, who came and cleaned the flood silt from the transmitter building floor with a shop vac she brought from home. Tom Zvella, who had gotten the truck and the glass plant job and who spent a weekend with 2 of his sons repairing the fence line that the flood had damaged. A retired electrician named Garfield, who checked every circuit in the transmitter building and pronounced it sound above the flood line and sketched out a rewiring plan for the lower connections. Rosie brought food most Thursdays. She left it at the gate when Nora wasn't there. which was how Nora found out she'd been eating dinners Rosie had made without knowing who'd left them. She was not alone on this hillside. The community Decker had served for 37 years had absorbed her into its attention the way it absorbed every other need, not with announcement, not with fanfare, just with the quiet, ongoing competence of people who had learned from one man's example that showing up was the primary skill. She was learning to let it land. Clem knew an RF engineer named June Abrams, no relation to Nora's mother, who drove up from Springfield on a Wednesday to assess the transmitter. She was 50 and precise, with a clipboard and a cable tester, and the focused manner of someone who respected equipment enough to be honest about it. She spent 4 hours in the transmitter building. When she came out, she gave Nora a typed list on a legal pad she tore from her clipboard. "The transmitter itself is fine," she said. "It was above the flood line in the housing. The antenna feed line has one moisture intrusion I'd replace before you go on air. The grounding system needs inspection. I'd recommend a new ground rod on the south side. The mixing console upstairs is clean and functional. I tested the signal chain. Your main transmitter output cable needs new connectors at both ends, which is a 2-hour job." She paused. "The FM signal chain from this facility, if you address these items, would broadcast cleanly at your licensed power level across Harwick County and adjacent markets. What would the parts cost?" Nora asked. June Abrams looked at her list. $800, give or take. Labor is usually 4 to 6 hours. I charge $90 an hour. Nora did not have $800. She had the $22,000 in the trust account, but the account required legal access she didn't yet have confirmed, because she hadn't been able to open what was in the broadcast room and she didn't fully understand the trust structure yet. She had not told June Abrams this. She thanked her, wrote down every item on the list, and walked her to her car. Then she went up the stairs to the broadcast room and sat in Decker's chair and looked at the Ozark Hills through the west-facing window and thought about what she had and what she needed and in what order the sequence went. Clem came up that afternoon. He knocked on the broadcast room door before entering, which she noticed and appreciated. He sat in the secondary chair, a folding chair that had lived in the corner, she suspected, for Clem's 19 years of engineering sessions, and she read him June's list. He went through it item by item. The antenna feed line, he had cable in his barn. The ground rod, $20 at the county co-op. The transmitter output connectors, his daughter knew an ARF technician in Branson. The labor, Clem had rebuilt the entire studio cable configuration in 2009 and had not forgotten how. "I'm not asking you to do this," Nora said. "I know you're not." He looked at the console. Decker went off air 8 months ago. 8 months of silence on 91.3 across 3 counties. That's 8 months of no farm report, no local music. No interviews with the county road commissioner about the pothole situation on Route 9, which, I can tell you, is considerable. He looked at his hands. "Getting this station back on air is not about what you owe me. It's about what this county has been without for 8 months. She understood. The station wasn't hers any more than the church had been Corinne's or the lighthouse had been Wade's. It was hers to keep, to hold and operate and continue, and keeping it was the work, not ownership. The repair work took 11 days. Clem and his daughter's contact from Branson addressed the technical items. Ada and Tom's and Garfield addressed the physical plant. Nora worked every hour she wasn't sleeping, learning the equipment from Clem with the systematic attention of someone who understood that you learned a new language by using it rather than studying it. She learned the mixing board. She learned the transmitter controls and the monitoring meters and the log system and the signal chain from console to antenna. She learned where the reel-to-reel maintenance tools were and how the turntable cartridges wore and what the modulation meter was supposed to read during broadcast. She learned from 37 years of Decker's equipment logs how a working station thought about itself. On the 9th day, she opened the bank envelope and confirmed the trust account number and began the process of accessing it through Clem's recommendation of a banker in Ava who had managed the account for years and who, upon hearing Nora's name, said, "I was wondering when you'd call," and then paused and said, "He told me you'd call. He said it might take a while, but you'd call." She had not yet opened the padded envelope from the broadcast room. She was still not ready. She would know when she was. The letter from Sutton Regional Media arrived on a Monday, forwarded from Prentice's office because the tower site had no street mail delivery, and Nora had given the executor's address as a contact. Prentice added a handwritten note on a sticky, "Thought you should see this. No comment from me." The letterhead was Sutton Regional Media, LLC, Branson, Missouri. The signatory was Gareth Sutton, principal. She read it at the workbench in the transmitter building, between the headphones and the log card, the crystallized coffee mug on her right. Gareth Sutton claimed he had entered into an option to purchase agreement with the estate executor for the Clay Tower property and associated assets. He attached what appeared to be a signed agreement between himself and Prentice, dated 2 months after the flood, describing a purchase option at a specified price contingent on the estate's ability to transfer clear title. He stated that the subsequent tax lien auction had transferred the property incorrectly, as the option agreement should have triggered a prior claim. He was filing with the county court to have the transfer reviewed and the property returned to the estate, at which point his option agreement would give him the right to purchase. He wanted the frequency. Nora read the letter 3 times. Then she read it a 4th time, looking specifically for the word trust or any acknowledgement that the property had been held in a trust predating both the option agreement and the tax lien. The word did not appear. Gareth Sutton, or his lawyers, had either not found the trust filing or had chosen not to address it. She went to Clem. He read the letter standing in his barn doorway. When he looked up, his expression had the particular quality of a person confronting something they'd been half expecting. "Gareth Sutton," he said. "You know him." "I know of him. Decker mentioned him more than once in the last 2 years." He handed the letter back. Sutton Regional Media has been consolidating small market FM stations across southern Missouri for about 6 years. They buy struggling community stations, flip them to standardized formats, and sell the ad inventory across the network. The model works financially and strips everything individual out of local radio. He paused. He's been interested in 91.3 specifically because it's a clean frequency with good propagation across the Ozark Hills. Getting it would give him coverage he doesn't currently have. He had an agreement with the executor. Prentice didn't know about the trust, Clem said. "I'd wager on it. He assessed the property as an estate asset because he didn't dig far enough to find the trust filing." Sutton moved fast after the flood, before anyone who knew Decker's full arrangements had a chance to speak. "I need a lawyer." "Miriam Cho," Clem said. He said it the same way Gus had said Rosamond Hale, the same way Hank had said the retired attorney, the same way Agnes had said Petra Villanueva, as if the name had been ready, waiting for the question. Gareth Sutton came to the property on a Wednesday. He drove a company truck, white, new, with the Sutton Regional Media logo on the door, and he was not what she expected, which was something she thought about later. He was in his late 30s, not 50 as she'd pictured. He was medium height and plainly dressed, without the performance of authority that the letterhead implied. He had the look of someone who had worked hard to get where he was, and still carried the memory of having worked hard. He stood at the gate and looked at the tower with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Not the calculating expression she'd expected, something more complicated. "Miss Vance," he said when she came to the gate. "Mr. Sutton, I'm not here to threaten you," he said. It came out directly, without the smooth preface she'd expected. "I'm here because I thought we should talk before lawyers made it expensive. The option agreement you signed with Prentice," she said. "You know the property was in a trust." He was quiet for a moment. "I found out about the trust after the agreement was signed. I'm telling you that directly." He looked at the tower. "I had information from Prentice that it was a straightforward estate." "It wasn't straightforward." "No," Nora said. "It wasn't." He looked at the broadcast building, at the exterior staircase going up to the studio, at the tower above. Something in his posture was different from the man she'd expected. The way he held his shoulders, slightly forward, attentive. 91.3 is a valuable frequency, he said. "The propagation across the Ozark Hills from this site is exceptional. I've had it modeled. With a tower upgrade and a format change, you could reach—" "I know what the frequency does," Nora said. Decker knew it for 37 years. Gareth Sutton went still. His eyes moved from the tower to her. "You know about him," he said. He said it not as a question but as a sentence that was working something out. "I know what he built here," Nora said. "I know what the station was for." She held the gatepost. "What would you do with it?" He was honest. She gave him that. He described his format model without embellishment: regional aggregated programming, standardized content blocks, national ad inventory. Efficient, profitable, entirely stripped of the thing that made Clay what it was. "That's not what this station is for," Nora said. He looked at her steadily. He had the eyes of someone who had been told no before and had almost always found a way around it, and who was beginning to understand that this particular no was a different shape. "I'll be filing the motion," he said finally. "I think the option agreement has standing." "My lawyers believe it does." "My lawyer disagrees," Nora said. "We'll see." He nodded once. He got back in his truck. He drove out the gate and down Route 9. She watched the truck until it was gone. Then she went to the workbench and stood between the headphones and the crystallized coffee mug and the log card and thought about Decker Hale, who had kept a radio station running for 37 years so the Ozark Hills could hear themselves, and who had sealed a room with her name on it so that someone would still be there to keep it running after he couldn't. She took the padded envelope out of her jacket pocket. She looked at her name on the front. She was ready. Miriam Cho's office was in a converted Victorian in Mountain Grove, 45 minutes north on the highway. On the ground floor with a sign beside the door that said Miriam Cho, attorney at law, by appointment, and below it, in smaller letters, a phone number that had been crossed out and rewritten twice. She was 63, slight and deliberate, with the manner of a woman who had stopped performing patience and simply had it. She made tea without asking and read every document Nora laid on the table. The trust instrument she'd found with the FCC filing, the ledger, the bank documentation, the option agreement from Sutton Regional, in the careful order of someone who had been reading legal documents for 30 years and understood that sequence was not incidental. When she finished, she aligned the papers and set her reading glasses on top of them. "The trust predates the option agreement by 3 years and 2 months, she said. "The property was not in the estate when Prentice assessed it. It was in the trust. Prentice's authority as estate executor did not extend to property held in a separate trust instrument. So his agreement with Sutton has no standing against the trust's prior claim." She folded her hands. "Sutton's lawyers will know this, if they're competent. The question is whether they file the motion anyway to create pressure or whether they fold." He said he'd file. "Then we'll answer it." She looked at Nora. "I need to tell you something about how I know Decker Hale." Nora waited. "My daughter had a crisis when she was 19. Mental health, a hospitalization in Rolla, a long recovery. I was in the middle of a case that wouldn't let me leave, and I was falling apart trying to manage both things. And Decker Hale, who I had known only as a voice on the radio and a man I'd spoken to twice at county community meetings, drove to Rolla twice a week for 8 weeks to sit with my daughter while I couldn't. He brought her music. He brought a portable speaker and played her old Ozark recordings and talked to her about the hills and told her things about the county that made her feel like a place existed that was worth coming back to." She stopped. "He never sent a bill. He never mentioned it publicly. He never asked for anything." She was quiet for a moment. "I have been waiting for 3 years to be useful to something he cared about. I'm grateful this arrived." She paused. "Open the envelope, Nora. You said you haven't yet." They went back to the tower together. Nora and Miriam and Clem, who had come with them without being asked and was, she had come to understand, simply going to be present for the things that mattered. She went up the stairs to the broadcast room, sat in Decker's chair. The hills were orange and gold in the October afternoon through the west window, the Ozark hardwoods at peak color. She opened the padded envelope. Inside was not paper. Inside was a flash drive, a small rectangular one. Orange, with a label that said in Decker's handwriting, "Play through the board. Left channel first." And below the flash drive, a single index card. "The cable is in the left drawer. The board is already cued. Press play when you're ready." She opened the left drawer, found a flash drive cable, plugged it into the console's USB port. The console's screen, a small LCD in the center of the board, showed a file. One audio file. 47 minutes and 23 seconds long, titled, "For Nora." Final broadcast. Clem looked at the console. He sat in the secondary chair. He recorded it, he said quietly. He put it on a drive and plugged it into the broadcast console so it was ready. He looked at Nora. "That's Decker. He wanted you to receive it the right way, the way he gave everything." She pressed play. His voice came through the studio monitors, warm and unhurried, with a particular quality her mother had described, a man who found the world genuinely interesting and wanted to talk about it. A voice that belonged on the radio. "Good evening from Ridgeline Tower on Route 9 in Harwick County. This is Clay, 91.3 FM, and I'm Decker Hale, and this is the last broadcast I'm going to make from this chair. I've got some things I want to say, and then I've got some music, and then I'm going to say one more thing at the end, and that thing is specifically for you, Nora, so if you'd stay with me until then, I'd be grateful." He played a fiddle tune first. Then he talked for a while about the station, the history of it, the early years, the first broadcast, the things he'd learned about radio and about communities and about the particular responsibility of holding a frequency in a small place. He talked about the community fund without calling it that, describing it as the station's other programming, the kind that didn't go out over the air, but that reached people just as directly. He talked about June. Your mother called in on a Friday evening in October, I believe it was 1999 or 2000, and she got the trivia question right on the first try and won $300 from the listener fund, and she gave it back before I'd finished congratulating her. She said, "Put it towards someone who needs it more." I argued. She said, "Decker, I know you. I know what you do with the fund. Put it toward someone specific. Put it toward Nora. She knew I'd see you someday. She believed you'd find your way to Harwick County even if she couldn't bring you herself. She said you were stubborn like her, which she said like it was a liability. I told her stubbornness was a form of faith, and she said that was the most radio DJ thing she'd ever heard. She was right. It was. I've been saying things like that on air for 37 years. He played another song, a slow waltz, instrumental. Nora listened and looked at the hills going golden dark in the late afternoon. Then he came back. "Now the thing that's specifically for you, Nora. I don't know exactly what's happened in your life between when your mother died and when you're sitting in that chair listening to this. I know it's been hard. I know the county system is not designed for children who need it the most, and I know that 2 years between 18 and 20 with no family and no particular place can do things to a person's idea of what they deserve. I want to say something clearly so that it lands the right way. You deserve this. Not because you've earned it. Not because you've been good enough or persistent enough or grateful enough. You deserve it because you're June's daughter and you're my family, and family is not something you earn. It's something you are. The trust is real. The license is real. The $22,500 is real, and the first $3,000 of it was your mother's to begin with. Which means it was always yours. The frequency is yours. The tower is yours. The community of people who have been listening to 91.3 across these hills for 37 years, they're yours if you want them, and I think you'll want them. Because you're in that chair, and the fact that you're in that chair tells me what I needed to know. There's one more thing. In the broadcast logs, the daily logs in the cabinet below the console, 37 years of them, you'll find a name that comes up more than once. Page through the logs from 2001 to 2003. A young man used the studio every Tuesday afternoon for 2 years. He was 18 when he walked up to this tower and knocked on the building door and asked if he could learn how to run a board. He had no experience and no money for school and the confidence of someone who had nothing to lose. I gave him Tuesday afternoons for 2 years. I gave him mic time on the late slot when nothing else was running. I taught him everything he knew about radio. His name is in every Tuesday log for 2 years, Nora. His name is Gareth Sutton. The room was very quiet. I'm not telling you this as a weapon. I'm telling you so you understand what this station is and what it means. This station gave Gareth Sutton the thing that built his career. He walked up this road with nothing and left 2 years later with everything he needed to become what he became. And what he became came back to try to take what gave it to him. I don't think he's a bad man. I think he forgot where he came from. Men do that. Sometimes they need reminding. Keep the station running, Nora. Keep the board live and the signal clean and the farm report accurate and the music honest. Keep the door open for the person who walks up the road with nothing. That's what this place is for. That's what it's always been for. This is Decker Hale, signing off from Clay, 91.3 FM, Harwick County, Missouri. Good night. A final song played. An old Ozark hymn. Unaccompanied fiddle. The kind of music that didn't ask anything of you except that you listen. It ran for 3 minutes and 40 seconds, and then the file ended, and the room was silent, and the hills were dark outside the west window. Nora sat in Decker's chair with her hands in her lap. Clem had his face turned toward the wall. He was not crying in a way he would admit to. He was managing something. Miriam set her tea down on the console with the careful placement of a person who needed something to do with her hands. The broadcast logs, Nora said finally. Cabinet below the console. She opened it. 37 years of daily logs in archival folders, labeled by year. She pulled 2001. Flip to Tuesday entries. Gareth Sutton Studio Session Board Operator Training. Week after week. 47 Tuesdays. Then in 2002, the entries changed. Gareth Sutton Late Slot Broadcast 10 p.m. to midnight. A year and a half of late slot broadcasts. Gareth Sutton's voice going out over 91. 3 across Harwick County and 2 counties beyond on clear nights. Courtesy of a tower and a frequency, and a man who gave Tuesday afternoons to people with nothing to lose. She set the log on the console beside the headphones she'd brought up from the transmitter room. He knows his name is in these logs, Miriam said. He knows, Nora said. Then he's filed a motion he can't win against a station that gave him everything he has, Miriam said. And when that becomes public record, I don't want it public, Nora said. Miriam looked at her. I want to tell him directly, Nora said. Before the hearing. He should know what Decker said. The hearing was set for a Thursday in November at the Harwick County Circuit Court. Nora drove down with Miriam in Miriam's car, Clem following in his truck. The day was cold and clear, the Ozark Hills stripped to their bone structure now that the leaves were down, the ridgelines showing bare against the sky the way they only did between October and April. But before the hearing, on the Tuesday before it, she called Gareth Sutton. He answered on the second ring. She said, "My great-uncle left a recording, a final broadcast, sealed in the studio. He talked about the station and the community fund and my mother. And he talked about you." Silence on the line. "He talked about the Tuesday sessions," she said. 2001 to 2003. The late slot broadcasts. "He said you came up the road with nothing, and left with everything you needed." A long pause. "He also said he didn't think you were a bad man," Nora said. "He said he thought you'd forgotten where you came from. He said sometimes people needed reminding." She heard him breathing. "The motion is your decision," she said. "Miriam Cho is going to show up Thursday with a trust filing that predates your option agreement by 3 years and 2 months, and the hearing will last about 20 minutes and the motion will be denied. That's what's going to happen legally." She paused. "I called because Decker asked me to understand you, not to defeat you, and I thought you should know that before Thursday." She ended the call. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, the gravity of a space where things were settled. Gareth Sutton sat at the petitioner's table with his attorney from Springfield, a younger man, very polished, with the organized manner of someone who had prepared a strong argument for a weak position. He did not look at Nora when she came in. Miriam set her folder on the respondent's table and sat without apparent urgency. The motion's attorney went first. He had prepared well. He argued that the option agreement represented a prior contractual obligation that should have been honored before the tax lien auction proceeded, that the executor had legal authority to bind the estate to such agreements, and that Nora Vance's claim through a trust instrument that had not been properly communicated to the estate's administrative process was irregular. The argument was structured. The structure rested on the claim that the trust was irregular, which required ignoring the county recorder's stamp from 3 years and 2 months ago. Miriam stood. "The trust filing is on record at the Harwick County Recorder's Office, dated 3 years and 2 months before the petitioner's option agreement." She set the original trust instrument on the table. The executor did not have authority to bind property held in a separate trust, because that property was not in the estate. The tax lien auction processed the municipal fines against the property and transferred it to the trust beneficiary, consistent with the trust's design. The petitioner's option agreement was signed with a party who had no standing to make it. She laid the recorder's stamp, the timeline document, and the bank account records on the table in sequence. The trust is valid. The transfer is valid. The broadcasting license was renewed through the trust account before the decedent's death and is currently active and in good standing with the FCC. She folded her hands. There is nothing before this court to adjudicate. Gareth Sutton's attorney conferred with him in low voices. When he turned back to the room, he was already deflated, not dramatically, but in the way of someone who had known on Tuesday, after a phone call, that this was how Thursday was going to go. He spoke for 3 minutes. He cited the unusual circumstances of the trust's administration, the executor's good faith belief that the property was estate property, and the financial investment Sutton Regional had made in preparing for the acquisition. He was professional and thorough, and the foundation had already given way. The judge, a man named Alderman in his 60s, who wore reading glasses on a chain and gave the impression of someone who had heard too many arguments and developed, over time, a reliable instinct for which ones were real, read the trust instrument for several minutes. He read the recording of the deed stamp. He read the FCC license renewal confirmation. He looked at Gareth Sutton's table. "Counsel, is there any evidence that the trust instrument was unknown to the decedent's estate at the time the executor signed the option agreement, as distinct from the question of whether the executor had authority to sign it?" The attorney acknowledged there was not. "Then the executor signed an agreement about property he did not control," the judge said. He set the documents down. "The trust predates the option by more than 3 years. The trust beneficiary was identified in the filing. The property was not estate property, and the executor had no standing to create an option interest in it." He looked at both tables. Motion denied. The Clit Tower property and associated trust assets, including the broadcasting license and account funds, are confirmed as held in the Decker-Hale Community Trust for the benefit of Nora Vance. This matter is closed. Outside, the November sky was the deep cold blue that the Ozarks got in the weeks after the leaves came down, and the bare ridgelines ran in every direction. And the air smelled like wood smoke and creek water. Gareth Sutton came out after them. He stopped at the courthouse steps. His attorney had already gone to the car. He looked at the ridgeline for a while. "He gave me Tuesday afternoons for 2 years," he said. "I showed up with nothing. I didn't even have a reason he should take me seriously. He took me seriously anyway." He stopped. "He never asked for anything back." "No," Nora said. "I built a company on what he taught me." He was quiet. "I came back to take his station." Nora looked at the hills, at the bare trees and the cold light and the smoke from a farmhouse chimney visible in the middle distance. "He said he thought you'd forgotten where you came from," she said. "He didn't say he was angry about it." Gareth looked at her. "Are you?" She thought about that honestly. "No," she said. "I wasn't there for most of it. I'm just here now." He was quiet for a long time. He looked at his car and back at the ridgeline and then at her. "If you need an underwriter for the license renewal fees," he said, "there's a regional broadcasting support fund I contribute to. I can make a referral." He paused. "That's not a negotiation." "I'm not asking for anything. I'm just saying." Nora nodded once. He walked down the steps to the parking lot. He didn't look back. Clem was at the bottom of the courthouse steps with his hands in his pockets, and the expression of a man who had been prepared for either outcome and was quietly satisfied with this one. "Ready?" he said. "Yes," Nora said. They drove north through the Ozark Hills, back toward the tower on Route 9, and the sky above the ridgelines was wide and very blue, and the late afternoon light caught the tops of the bare trees and turned them the color of old brass, and Nora rode with her arm on the window in the cold air and thought about a man she'd never met who had given Tuesday afternoons to people who showed up with nothing, who had kept a frequency clean and a signal honest for 37 years, who had made a recording for a girl he'd never spoken to and set it in a broadcast console where she'd find it when she was ready. She was ready. Clay, 91.3 FM, went back on air on a Sunday morning in December. Clem ran the board for the first broadcast while Nora watched and learned and, in the last 15 minutes, took the chair herself. She opened the mic and said, in a voice that was quieter than Decker's and more uncertain than her own, "Good morning from Ridgeline Tower on Route 9. This is Clay, 91,003 FM. We've been off the air for 8 months. We're back." Then she played the fiddle tune Decker had opened his final recording with, because it was the right way to mark a beginning that was also a continuation. The calls started coming in before the hour was out. She hadn't expected it. She didn't fully know what she'd expected. Some acknowledgement, maybe. Some confirmation that the signal was reaching. But what came in was more than that. People who'd been listening to 91.3 for years, who'd woken up one morning 8 months ago to static and felt the particular loss of a voice that had been there every morning and was suddenly not. People who wanted to say they were glad it was back. People who wanted to know if the farm report was coming. One man who called specifically to ask about the Bluegrass Hour and whether it was going to be on Saturdays. Saturdays, Nora said. We're keeping the Bluegrass Hour. She was learning the station the way she'd learned every skill she had, from what the situation required, one step at a time. Clem taught her the technical side and the programming structure. Ada came twice a week to help with the equipment log and the compliance documentation. Tom's oldest son, who turned out to have an interest in sound engineering he'd never had a context for, started appearing on Saturdays to help with the music programming. She kept Decker's log card on the console beside the headphones and the crystallized coffee mug, which she had not washed. It was unreasonable, and she knew it, and she kept it anyway. Some things you preserved because throwing them away was a choice that cost something. She started a notebook. A composition book from the county store in Ava, started the week after the courthouse with a first entry in her own handwriting, slanted slightly right. November. Clem Okafor, 19 years of unpaid engineering. A voltage regulator. $47, unasked, to be remembered. She wasn't keeping a ledger of debts. She was keeping the record Decker had kept, the accounting of a community paying attention to itself, written down because writing it down was what made it real in the way that mattered beyond the moment. In January, a young man showed up at the gate. He was 19, and he was from across the county, and his name was Felix. And he had driven to the tower on a county road he'd never been on before, because he'd heard Clay come back on air and had heard something in the quality of the signal that made him want to see the place it came from. He said this directly, which she respected. He said he'd been interested in radio since he was 12 and had never been anywhere near the equipment for it. Nora opened the gate. She showed him the transmitter building, the racks, the meters, the equipment Clem had brought back to operational. She showed him the exterior staircase and the broadcast room and the console and the view of the Ozark Hills from the west window, which in January was the pale winter light on bare ridgelines, all bones and sky, different from the summer and more honest. He stood in the broadcast room and looked at the console with the expression of a person who had just found something they hadn't known they were looking for. What would it take, he said, to learn how to run this? She thought about Tuesday afternoons. About a young man with nothing, and the confidence of someone who had nothing to lose. Who knocked on the door of a tower on Route 9 and was given 2 years of evenings and came back 30 years later having forgotten what was given to him. She thought about what Decker had known about that moment, the moment when the right door opened for the right person, and what he'd always done about it. Come back Saturday, she said. Clem teaches the technical side. I'll give you afternoon studio time to learn the board. We don't pay, and it's a lot of work, and the frequency reaches maybe 3 counties on a clear night. She looked at the console. But the acoustics in here are remarkable. Felix looked at the mixing board. He looked at the west window and the hills. He looked at the headphones on the console, the worn left ear pad, the newer right one. The 37 years of accumulated use. I'll be back Saturday, he said. She wrote his name in the notebook that evening. January. Felix showed up at the gate knowing nothing. Starting Saturdays. To be remembered. She didn't know what his life would hold beyond this tower, or whether Harwick County would be where he stayed. She knew he'd had coffee in the transmitter room, and an afternoon on the board, and a view of the Ozark Hills from 20 feet up, and that was the shape of the possible from where she stood. She went back to the broadcast room that evening, and sat in Decker's chair and queued up the Bluegrass Hour, and opened the mic and said good evening to Harwick County, and 2 counties beyond on a clear night. And then she played the music and let the signal go out across the hills, the way it had gone for 37 years, the way it was going to keep going. The transmitter meters read steady. The modulation was clean. The frequency was 91.3, unchanged. The same signal from the same tower, just a different hand on the board. She closed the mic at the end of the hour and listened to the silence of the broadcast room and the hills outside and the creek at the southern boundary of the property running full with January rain. She was 20 years old, and she had a station and a license and a community and a notebook that was filling up. It was enough. It was exactly enough. 6 months after the broadcast came back on, Clay was in the county directory. Not the official one, the printed one that went to schools and businesses and the county extension office. That one took time, and Nora was working on it. But in the informal directory that people maintained in their phones and on the refrigerator. The one that said call this person for eggs and this shop does good work and this frequency for the farm report, Clay, 91.3 had come back, and it was there. The Thursday afternoon show had the highest call-in rate in the station's history, according to Clem, who tracked such things in the logbooks. Nora thought this was partly because the county had been without local radio for 8 months and was compensating, and partly because she asked better questions than she'd expected to. She was still learning what she was doing. She expected to be for a while. Felix had become what Tuesday afternoons had made Gareth Sutton, only with the additional knowledge, which Nora had told him directly on his third Saturday, of what Tuesday afternoons meant and what you were supposed to do with them eventually. He knew the story. He was going to have to decide what kind of person he was, and she thought he was going to decide correctly, and she was prepared to let him arrive at that on his own. Miriam called on the first anniversary of the auction to say that the trust documents were fully registered with the county in Nora's name, and that all administrative questions had been resolved. The call took 4 minutes and ended with Miriam saying that Decker would have been satisfied, which was, she noted, higher praise than he would have allowed anyone to say aloud. Gareth Sutton had sent a referral to the Regional Broadcasting Support Fund. The annual fee for the license renewal was covered for the next 3 years. No note accompanied the referral. He had not called. Nora did not call him either. Some things settled into their right shape without requiring a formal conversation. The notebook was a third full. She wrote in it every evening after the last broadcast, names, dates, the specific accounting of a community keeping track of itself. It was not Decker's record. It was hers, the beginning of one, the continuation of something older and larger than either of them. On a clear night in late spring, she climbed to the broadcast room and opened the mic and did the sign-off herself. Not the words Decker had always used, but her own words, still finding their shape. The signal went out at 91.3 across Harwick County, and 2 counties beyond, the same frequency from the same tower, carrying the same intention it had always carried across the Ozark Hills. A signal doesn't know who's sending it. It only knows how far it can reach. You put it out there, you make it honest. You keep it on. That's the whole job. That was always the whole job.